Hello boys and girls, today I'm going to be showing you guys how to craft in Last Epoch. This isn't going to be a super basic guide, although I will be going over a lot of the currencies. But if you guys will want something way more in depth, you can always look up videos that explain all of, again, the more basic stuff. I will try to show examples of how I craft items that are just quick upgrades. I'll try to show you guys how to craft items that are more long-term upgrades, and most importantly, and this is going to be the complicated part of the guide, how to use Glyphs of Despair to efficiently craft your gear, and then how to craft on experimental basis with both the use of a Rune of Research and also the incredibly elusive and complicated, if my cursor begins to work, Glyph of Insight, because there's actually a lot of information that isn't available in game about this that we do have access to when it comes to the data mine, and you can actually craft items pretty predictably 100% of the time. So for the example, I will be using my Wraith Lord character, so I'll try to explain things in a more general way, but the character will be for this. So some of the stats that I'm going to be focusing on are going to be HP, they're going to be intelligence, and a lot of the minion stats. So without further ado, let's get into explaining some of the currencies. First one, Rune of Shattering. Everybody knows this one. You just remove the item and claim the affixes. Rune of Refinement. With this, you're going to be able to re-roll affixes within their tiers. So for instance, if you have a really nice item that you want to keep nice health on, like for instance my ring with the health, that's something that I wouldn't use. But if the health was at the range of 56, I would want it to be 75. If I have extra potential, this might be something that I'm going to be using. Rune of Removal is incredibly useful because you can target specific affixes to remove them from gear. This is both very useful for fixing endgame items, but simultaneously to get the affixes from gear with 100% certainty. If it's something that's rare, for instance, a rare affix that you find, you don't want to risk not getting all of the shards with a Rune of Shattering, so you're going to be using a Rune of Removal for that. Rune of Discovery is something that you're going to be using a lot on low tier items that you just quickly want to slot in and upgrade, but it's not something that I recommend in high-end crafting. This, without any cost to your forging potential, will add random tier 1 affixes to your item, essentially filling it up, but it is a little bit tricky and I don't like using this rune. Rune of Shaping rerolls implicits, nothing else more to it. There will be items that are just better based off of the implicit than sometimes even the rest of the affixes combined. A good example would be an Opulent Focus. You can see that it rolls from 8 to 16 intelligence, which is a high amount of variance, 32 to 54 ward, a lot of variance there too, and then 42 and 86 ward retention, a lot of variance, and these are incredible stats. Even on a character as strong as mine with 18k ward, I really only have 514 ward retention, so this makes up for like 20% of it on a high roll. Like that's a pretty big deal. So definitely something that you might want to consider starting off with, depending on the sort of items that you have. I love the cursor in this game. This is a Rune of Ascendance. We will not really be explaining anything in regards to that one. Please video game work, because yeah, you're just upgrading items to uniques. It doesn't keep the base, I guess, would be the only explanation if you are looking to craft with it. So if you have I don't know, a Necromancer chest piece and you upgrade it with Rune of Ascendance, it can upgrade into any base. It will not necessarily upgrade into a item piece for the Necromancer, so it's something to keep in mind. We can use a Rune of Creation to mirror items, essentially like in Path of Exile, but do keep in mind that this reduces the crafting potential to 0, so you never want to be using this at any point in time other than towards the end where you're expecting your forging potential to reach 0 anyway. And then Rune of Research is pretty simple. You use it to seal the affix. So essentially you will be able to create 5 affix items with it, but it has to be an experimental mod, and I will be explaining more about this rune when we are in the experimental based section. Glyph of Hope, everybody's familiar with this one, just a 25% chance to preserve your forging potential. This is very valuable and you should be using a lot of the times, and this will also a lot of the times determine that you shouldn't be using a Glyph of Chaos. If you are using a low-level item, and if there are, for instance, a lot of suffixes or a lot of prefixes that your item could potentially roll into, a Glyph of Chaos is okay in the earlier stages of the game, but overall, if you're trying to make high-end items or even mid items, I would avoid using it, but I will be showing some examples, hopefully, where I utilize it. Glyph of Order is very, very nice. If you have a tier 4 item with a really high range roll, you might want to use this to upgrade. You are risking not preserving the forging potential, but if you have a lot of forging potential and you really like that affix, you can use this to upgrade it and retain the high level range. Then you've got Glyph of Despair. This is one of the more interesting glyphs in the game, because not only does it allow our items to have 5 affixes, but also it allows you to clean your items in a more deterministic way compared to a rune of removal, because you can target things, and we do know the values of what the percentage chance of you successfully doing so is, so you can always make the correct decision. And then we've got Glyph of Insight, which we'll get there when we get there. And with that, let's get into the crafting. The most important thing is determining what kind of item you're trying to make prior to actually crafting the item. Are you trying to make an upgrade? So in my case, I really care about the minion health on this item, but I don't care about the cast speed, and I don't care about the dodge. The ward is also incredibly useful. I was trying to make a high-end item with this, but I failed. And this is the result of it, unfortunately. So, are you trying to make an item with 5 affixes? Are you trying to make an item that preserves a very valuable exalted mod? Are you trying to make an item that has really good implicits, and the affixes don't really matter to you as much outside of maybe one? Those are going to have to be questions that you're going to be asking yourself, and knowledge that you're going to need from either the build guide or just playing the build. So for instance, I was in a situation where my Wraith Lord wasn't quite having the levels of survivability that I really wanted it to, so I prioritized the minion health, even though technically minion damage for my build would be a more valuable affix, or something like maybe resistances on the suffix would give me an opportunity to get more HP on other gear slots. So always ask yourself that question. So the first example is going to be an item that doesn't have any really good mods for me whatsoever, and it doesn't have a good exalted mod either. But sometimes if you're trying to craft a low base with good implicits, you might be using something like this, because exalted items typically have a lot more forging potential. And for this one, we're going to be doing just that. I want minion damage, minion life, ward per second, and some type of resist that's going to allow me to either modify my blessings or modify my idols in a way that's going to increase the amount of HP that I've got for my build. So for this one in particular, there are a couple options. We can either remove everything, but with the amount of forging potential that it's got, I think it's most likely going to brick. I kind of like the void resistance, because that's what we mentioned. I don't like the mana, and I don't like the fire damage. So we could potentially chaos those, but really, when you take a look at it, for the prefixes, because we only like 2 of them, it's pretty unlikely that we're going to be chaosing into something that is going to be useful. And that's just kind of the name of the game. We're going to be going through a bunch of items, and probably most of them are going to brick. So for this one, especially, I want those suffixes to work, but if we can't, we can't. There's also the possibility of using a Glyph of Despair on this item and adding a mod and then sealing the void resistance, but that will decrease the chances of potentially removing these useless for us prefixes. So I'm going to remove it. -11, that's pretty bad. The mana is gone. Mana was one of those affixes that we potentially could have sealed. There's no way that we're going to be sealing fire damage, because we do know the numbers for this, and even if I were to craft it for a 4 property items, the chances of sealing a T6 mod are not even existent. The only thing that we can seal is up to 4, because we need to be able to upgrade it when using the Glyph of Despair. So our only other option, kill it. We lost 1, but we didn't remove the fire damage. We preserved in the last one, we've got 16 potential. And again, this might be something that you're going to be using in the earlier stages of the game, because there might be one particular affix that you're focusing on, and there's always that possibility of getting lucky. For me, the priority is going to be worth per second. We got a critical strike, worth per second looking good, and with the implicits, this is already looking to be an item that's potentially useful. The great thing about critically hitting something at this stage of the game is that if you take a look at the forging potential, the difference between the tiers of forging potential goes up. So you're a lot more likely to lose more forging potential the higher the tier of the item that you're upgrading. So generally, if you've got an item that's missing a lot of affixes, what you're going to want to do is add the lower ones and then use the lower forging potential to either get a Glyph of Hope and get more chances to click the item, or maybe hit another critical strike. But I'm probably going to click this and brick the item now. It's 1 in 14. We've got 16 potential, so we can't quite brick it. But it did go -6. I think going by this, I'm going to continue this idea and just keep on clicking. -7, that's fine. And then this one crits. No, it's -3. So we ended up without an item, but this was an item that didn't have a high chance of crafting something really good, but it ended up maybe having a little bit of potential of being something that is going to be useful in the mid tier. Obviously, if we just cared about the worth per second, we could have just kept upgrading it, and that would have been it. Another option would have been to use a Rune of Discovery instead of removing everything, but again, it's not really something that I like using even for items that are low tier. So the next item is going to be a ring with a bad implicit, but it's got a nice exalted mod that we really like. We want minion damage, intelligence, and then either crit avoidance or a resist, and then on top of that we want health. So for this one, I often get people asking me why I don't use a Glyph of Despair immediately to seal one of the modifiers, because clearly we do not want damage every time. We don't want DeFi resistance. I want all resistance, or I want poison resistance or physical resistance, or I want the crit avoid, and then we need the health, right? So the necrotic resistance is also not going to be something that's useful for me. So people often ask, why don't you just Glyph of Despair one of these mods? Well, the reason is because that's going to decrease the chances for us to potentially have a good item in the end. If I click a Rune of Removal, I have a 25% chance to remove this, and I have 25% chances to remove these. If I seal one of them, then we're going to increase the chance of removing the minion damage. But if I first remove, we have a higher chance of removing the necrotic resistance or one of these modifiers, and then we're going to have a higher chance of removing the necrotic resistance and sealing the remaining tier 1 modifier. And that is why for this item, because I think that it potentially can't be the best item that I could ever make because of the not so valuable implicit, the 11 dodge is just not so worthwhile. I am yet again going to use a Rune of Removal and hope that it doesn't remove the minion damage, but instead removes the necrotic resistance. Yeah, necrotic resistance would be best. All right, it removes the prefix, so we still have a 50-50 between these two. Again, if you were to seal this modifier right now, that would give you a 50% chance between these two. But if you don't seal it now, you still have a higher chance to be able to remove this one on top of this. So we're going to use another one and actually remove the necrotic resistance. So pretty much the perfect situation for me. I've got a fire resistance modifier on an exalted item, which we know for a fact, if we look at the Glyph of Despair data mined information, as long as the item is exalted and it's got 4 affixes, which we can add because we removed the useless ones, we can get a 100% chance to use a Glyph of Despair and seal the modifier that we do not want. Fire resistance is not so terrible, so it's a little bit of an extra benefit. That meaning we will fill up the other affixes and hope that they go about as well as they possibly could. We're going to be using intelligence for the first one for the prefix, -6. That's not great. And then for the other ones, we're going to be using a crit strike avoidance, I think, because with only 19 forging potential, I think this item will most likely not end up being particularly good. So to maximize the chances of us having a good item, I will use something that synergizes well with my 69 critical strike avoidance, because I will not need to get the critical strike avoidance to that high of a tier to be able to cap me out at 100%. I will only need the 31% on the roll, which is a lot more likely to happen than something like all res that I would need tier 5 of, because you always need more resistance. So let's use it. We crit. And this is actually something that's kind of scary, because in this case, it can crit any of the remaining modifiers. So that means that the intelligence got upgraded in this case, but it could have upgraded crit strike avoidance. It cannot upgrade the exalted mod, but it could have also upgraded the fire resistance. And if it did so, our chances of sealing this modifier would have been increased or decreased to 69%. So it's not exactly something that you want to be seeing, but 69% is still a pretty good chance. So at this point, continuing with our method of crafting, so far we have been lucky, although our forging potential is dropping. We have a 100% chance to seal this modifier, and unfortunately, this also resulted in -9 forging potential. So another thing that we want to be doing when it comes to this is that we want to fill the item with as many affixes as possible, as early as possible. This will obviously depend on the sort of item that you're making. Adding an affix does cost you extra. Do keep that in mind. However, as you can see, if I were to upgrade a tier 1 modifier, it's only 1 to 10. And then if I were to upgrade a tier 2, it's 1 to 12. So when upgrading items, you always want to be upgrading the lowest modifiers. So realistically speaking, if I don't believe that this item will end up being any good, which I personally don't think so, instead of adding the health, the greater chance for success to fully cap out our crit avoidance would be to upgrade the critical strike avoidance. This will most likely result in the least amount of forging potential spent, and it will also give me the highest chance of being able to upgrade as often as possible to hopefully preserve with a Glyph of Hope or hit another crit. So normally, I would put health on this item, but I think for this example specifically, because I don't expect this item to be good, I will try to get that 31% that we were talking about previously. And with that, -1, that's pretty good. If we reach tier 3, I think I will be adding the health. So let's see. Preserved, that's pretty good stuff. We've got a 1 in 12 on this. You can see that our tier 3 modifier is 1 to 18. So that's pretty much the exact same amount that you're going to be spending on adding an extra modifier. But I'll try to go for the int. -5, it's still alive. So now, upgrading these modifiers is going to be equivalent in chance to adding an additional 1. And at this point, it's completely up to you. Do you want a ring that's potentially going to have the crit avoidance? Do you want a ring that's got, the most intelligence that it can have? For my Wraith Lord build, I really want that HP. So since it costs me the exact same amount, and it's got the highest upgrade that I can get for my build, we're gonna go with that. It's -2, successful, somewhat. It's a 1 in 10, so we're still gonna use this because, well, it is still the highest chance that we can maybe not lose all of our forging potential. There you go. If we would have used it on a tier 3 or the other tier 3, this would have essentially been guaranteed to have failed, but this way we increase the chances of just getting a -1, and therefore we're able to click the item one more time, hopefully getting a Glyph of Hope. Nope, not this time. But for an item that started off being something very difficult to craft and being potentially, well, having a very low amount of potential, we ended up with something that is pretty valuable, I think, for a lot of people. We did get a little bit lucky, but hopefully this has shown you guys that even with crummy exalted items, you can get something that's quite nice if you just go through enough of them. For the next example, I will be crafting amulets. a little bit quicker amulets that potentially are on a very good base for me. One that needs a little bit of work on its implicit, and the other one is something that also has a very high potential of being a good item based off of the affixes. But the implicit is not as good, even though it rolled pretty well, because as I've explained, individual resistances aren't going to be something that interests me. So going with the method that we used previously for crafting the ring, I'm going to get into this one. Obviously, we want the minion damage. We cannot get intelligence on the prefix. So we're going to be getting minion health, something that's very valuable for my build on this amulet, because there is no other useful prefix. It's one of the slots of gear that doesn't require sacrificing something that is damage or defense oriented to increase the survivability of my Fernando. And then for the suffixes, amulets are different from rings in the way that they can now get double health. So you can get both the flat amount of health, but you can also get health and stun avoidance. This is a mod that's pretty rare, so keep a lookout on it. Maybe add it to your filter, because most likely you're going to be needing them depending on the amount of amulets you're going to be crafting, because typically you have to go through many of them. So I don't care about the dodge rating. I really don't want the increased healing effectiveness, because it hurts the amount of ward that I have on my build, because it increases the amount of HP that I have. So I hate it. And we are crafting a more endgamey amulet, so we are going to attempt to remove it. Why am I removing and not using a Glyph of Despair to seal the dodge? This can potentially remove the dodge. Well, that's because this gives us a higher chance of successfully preserving the other mod. Because even if it removes the increased healing effectiveness, we have a 50-50 chance here. But if we click this now, we will have a 33% chance to remove this. Yes, so click it, it removes that, and that leaves us with the 50-50. But technically we have the potential for an even better item, because we can now use the sealing of an affix, if we have enough forging potential, to create a 5 affix item. And we're gonna preserve and keep it. We're being pretty lucky today. Alright, so we're trying to fill up the item just like the previous one, with all of the valuable stuff that we care about. You should do this in the order that is most valuable for you. Like I mentioned, the minion health is super value for me here, and with -2 forging potential, I'm gonna continue to craft suffixes. Pretty lucky stuff. Sorry, the UI is killing me. We're going for health, because it's the higher value compared to the stun, so I want the health. Because the stun is a hybrid mod, meaning that it will have less health, but the stun avoidance can be useful too. -5 is not something we're happy about, but this will be, boom, preserved. So again, we are crafting from the bottom up, because we're trying to increase the chance that we will have as many clicks as possible. Boom, -7, not good stuff. This is a 1 in 12. I'm going to continue with these and hope that we're going to hit a critical strike that will then upgrade this health, preferably. I'm pretty good at this game. I mean, I'm just pretty good. So now we want to stay away from this health and upgrade the other ones so they can catch up to this and continue to hit those disgusting crits. Pretty good. This is a pretty good example of how crafting an item that isn't necessarily the highest potential might just result in one of the the best items that you're gonna have in your arsenal. So now we've got another decision. We can either get these mods to keep catching up, or we can upgrade this, which typically the jump from tier 4 to tier 5 is a lot more heavy than the other upgrades. So we can either attempt to go for the 1 in 24, but do keep in mind that we have the chance to crit, and then the 25% chance here. Or we can take the safe route and continue to upgrade these with potentially hitting another crit here. I personally think that because we have another health mod, which kind of accomplishes what this one does, I'm gonna go for the upgrade here. And we hit a -8, so it really doesn't take a long time for things to start going south. Upgrading this, very good. We get the 25% preservation. And I still think that with 19 forging potential, we have at least 2 more clicks that we can go for this before most likely inevitably having to upgrade this one to its final tier because we're not going to have enough forging potential to continue to upgrade the lower ones. We preserve. We go -2. All right, now it's getting spicy. So, pretty much everything has the same chance to upgrade, and you're picking the one that's most valuable for you. For me, it's going to be health. We have 1 to 24 with 17 potential. Those are pretty good odds that we will survive. And we do with -12, which is kind of unlucky, you know, compared to everything else. Next thing, most valuable mod for me, health and stun avoidance, -2. And now it gets interesting because there are a couple things that you can actually do here. I could upgrade the minion health, but with just 3 forging potential, it's most likely going to brick the item. We've got a very good item that we really want to keep. So what are our options? We take a look at the implicits. Are the implicits good? For me, the freeze rate multiplier is something that I don't care about, but the cold resistance is very valuable. But let's assume for the sake of the example that freeze rate multiplier is something very valuable. It rolls from 10 to 100. This one's only got 13. I think if it was valuable enough for me, instead of going for the minion health, another option that you can go for is re-rolling all the implicits with a rune of shaping. Again, if that were to be an example. For instance, if we were to be crafting this item right now, I very highly value the physical resistance. It's only got 14% and it can roll up to 40. So we've almost got a bottom row. If this was this item, I will absolutely forego the minion health and try and get the implicit to be stronger because the implicit is something that we really, really care about. But when we exit La La Land, the reality is that our implicit sucks and we don't actually need it because freeze rate multiplier is not something useful for my build. And with that, we're going to be hitting the upgrade on the minion life. However, there's another option. Maybe you're playing Trade League. You can always use a rune of creation, right? Maybe this is an amulet that you can sell. I can definitely sell this for probably 600 to 700,000 gold. So if I were to use a rune of creation, I can then keep the amulet that I want to use, although with lower minion health, and sell the other one. But because I don't need gold, because I'm kind of rich, you know, I've been lucky, as you can tell, I'm just going to upgrade it. It hits the -3. It's emptied out, but look at that. From an item that started off not being so good, we've got a tier 6 exalted item that we preserved. We've got the minion health that's perfect for us. We've got the 68 life that's perfect for us. We've got the 69 on the stun avoidance. It's pretty beautiful. I guess another option that I could have mentioned would have been that if we had rolled worse health on the stun, a really good thing that you could go for would be using one of these. Rune of Refinement rerolls the values of an affix. So this rerolls these affixes instead of the implicits, and that could have potentially allowed us to get a higher chance of getting the flat health to a higher rate, because right now it rolls from 66 to 88 and ours is a crummy 68. But because of the 69 health, it pretty much means that we've averaged out on the amount of health and we'd have to get lucky to get beyond that. So I went for the guaranteed increase in minion health, and I think it was the correct choice. A very good amulet that some of you guys are probably very jelly of. For the next one, in the basics of crafting portion of the video, let's just speedrun it. So again, it's an amulet. We want the physical resistance. I want a really good amulet. It's got a lot of health that I'm trying to preserve. But the implicit, it's not good enough. We just made an insane amulet. Why would I care about anything but the best in this? So for that, I am going to go for the rune of shaping, which can hit with the glyph of hope. But as far as I know, the rolls aren't exactly weighted, so let's see what we get. We preserve and we get 33. This is a really lucky day. 33 is way above average, so I immediately like the base a lot. But we want the health, we don't want the poison damage, and we don't want the chance to ignite. If we use a rune of removal, it has a high chance to hit this. It unfortunately has a chance to hit this, but by far it's the best thing that we can do now, because eventually we're going to be able to remove the poison damage with a Glyph of Despair. So let's go YOLO. And for once in this video, I did not get lucky. At this point, you got to judge for yourself. Based off of the implicit and the 22 forging, is this going to be worth it for you in terms of your crafting materials? I don't think so. So let's gamba up. Why not? Glyph of Chaos. Boom! Void Resistance with a crit. Alright, hold on. We're recovering. Void Resistance is one of the modifiers that we really wanted. Then we've got 22 Forging Potential. It's 1 to 18. So now you seriously have to consider, because we're getting close to emptying out the Forging Potential, do you maybe want to go for a Rune of Discovery? Again, there is very little chance that this will be a really good item and it will ever be better than our previous amulet, but it still might be something that might sell, or you might use an on and out or whatever. So because of that, I would use this amulet on and out. I'm gonna go for the Rune of Discovery and potentially get something that's useful. The good thing is, as much as these prefixes are not so hot, they're not so spicy, they're kind of hard to roll. You can see that there's a lot of them and very few of them are useful for us, like explained before. The suffixes are actually generally pretty good. There's just not as many suffixes, and I have a lot of them that I can utilize. Do keep in mind too that you have to, well, in this case, we are not spending any Forging Potential if we're using the Rune of Discovery, but do keep in mind that sometimes you have to reselect the Glyph of Hope, yeah? So we are doing this. It's spending no Forging Potential whatsoever. Boom! Elemental damage and fire resistance. This could have not gone worse. But again, we're not making a high-end item here. We are just gambling. So now we're back to the either two choices. We either go for the big play with Runes of Removal, or we keep chaosing. I think the likeliness that we're going to end up with the sort of affixes that we want is pretty low. So I will begin with the suffix using a chaos. Again, not useful. Unfortunately, you have to reselect it. Chaos again, necrotic resistance, not useful for me. You have to reselect it again and the UI is really buggy. But we could also go for these lower ones because the same rules for Forging Potential cost remain. So if you're trying to do this on a tier 3, every time you use this, it does upgrade the modifier. So it will cost you more Forging Potential. I think probably the necrotic resistance is a better example, but because I want to click more, let's use this. Boom, ward gain on potion use. I mean, you know, I've had worse. And it upgraded it to tier 3 also because it critted. But it could have upgraded anything else. Pretty sure, actually. So now, what do we want to remove? This has the highest likeliness of giving us something useful. Fire resistance again. And -6 Forging Potential. Our item is dead. Most likely not usable by your current character, but maybe in the future if you desperately need resistances. But like I mentioned, we weren't trying to craft the best item in the game. We were trying to craft a good item that always has the potential to be the best item in the game. It didn't work for this one, but it absolutely worked for the previous amulets. We are now going to get into the difficult part of the video. Maybe not immediately, but I'll warm you guys up with this experimental base. Probably also something that a lot of people clicked on the timestamp, since a lot of the previous stuff was a little bit elementary. So this is an experimental base with an exalted item. For me, what I really care about on the belt is for the prefixes to be minion damage and minion health, and for the suffixes is to be hybrid health, which is the best modifier in the game, and percent health. We can also get flat amounts of health, but it's pretty unlikely to do so because we would need to use a Glyph of Despair to add it. So if you're not crafting on an experimental base, you can have triple life on your belt, but it's probably going to take a lot of attempts because most likely you're going to try to seal maybe a tier 3 modifier, or at the very least a tier 2. But for this example, you can only have one sealed modifier, and for us, that needs to be the experimental volatile zombie. So what we can do with that is click a Rune of Research. Runes of Research are cool because we can use a Glyph of Hope alongside it. This will always target the experimental mod, and it will hit it 100% of the time. The only question is, how much is it going to cost us? The roll is 1 to 18, and it goes -15. Pretty unlucky stuff, but, you know, it is what it is. Now, we drop a Glyph of Insight, so I guess this kind of I said that once we get there, I'm gonna explain it. So the way that you obtain Glyphs of Insight is explained here. When an experimental affix is sealed, you have a chance to gain a Glyph of Insight. This chance is higher for items with higher tier affixes, but cannot exceed 45%. This means that we can upgrade affixes, seal experimental affixes, and it will give us a higher chance to get a Glyph of Insight, which actually we will use in just a second when I'm going to be explaining how to craft experimental bases deterministically without it being a experimental base to begin with. But continuing with the initial belt, I don't like anything about it. And this is a big belt that we want to go ham on. This is an item that I would really love to be my best in slot. I love the HP, although I don't love on the roll on the suffix, but I hate the lightning damage and I hate the cooldown recovery. We're pretty unlikely to get rid of this, and we cannot use a Glyph of Despair. So what are our options? Are we settling for just these two modifiers and adding a prefix? Are we going big endgame gaming? I think we're going big endgame and hoping that the health isn't removed, but we are getting rid of the increased cooldown recovery. Not today, Space Cowboy. We did not get rid of it. You get the idea. I don't think there's much of a reason to continue to explain it. You can use the other examples of the previous items to figure out how to go about utilizing this belt. In my case, it's a drop it on the ground situation. And now we are in the end game of our crafting session, how to create an experimental base deterministically without it previously being experimental. So I'm gonna use two examples, hopefully, maybe a little bit more because it's different depending on the sort of item that you are using. But essentially what it boils down to is that we can use a Glyph of Insight, and with the use of this website that's going to be linked in the description, depending on the sort of item that you are using, there are conditions that you need to fulfill to be able to craft the modifier that you want. So in my case, I haven't pre-checked these or anything like that, so we're gonna walk through all of them together and see if I can get the modifier that I want, which is going to be volatile zombies summoned on potion use, and I preferably want this affix to be tier 5 because it gives me 4 volatile zombies, which is amazing for my Wraith Lord build. First thing we need to do is go onto belts. Then we need to check what kind of belt is this. It's a coin mail belt. We need to select coin mail belt, which is in a particularly high base, and these bases will determine the condition on how to make the item. So what is the property for belt? Experimental affix type is determined by level requirement. Current level requirement is 57, although this isn't correct because we haven't put in the correct values. But this is the thing that we're going to be worried about. How do we increase or decrease our level requirement and get the correct suffixes to be able to change this into the zombie mod that we want? So first of all, we need to enter the properties. We know that it's a coin mail belt. We've got tier 6 and tier 4 on the prefixes, which is very good. I'll explain in just a second. And then we've got tier 3 and tier 4 on the suffixes. So tier 3 and tier 4. This unfortunately means that our item is level requirement 60. Excuse me, I need to also change this. We don't have a sealed affix, so there's no sealed affixes. This means that the item is level 61, and this means that unfortunately we do not gain the mana gained on we gain mana gained on potion use, but we don't gain the zombies that we want. So how can we mess around with this? Well, to be able to obtain our item, first of all, we're gonna need to be able to upgrade. For us, the zombie mod is a prefix, so we're going to be able to need to be able to upgrade a prefix with the Glyph of Insight to even hit it in the first place. We only have one, so mana regeneration is something that we just cannot modify no matter what, because if we go from 4 to 5, you can see that we can no longer upgrade it, therefore it will never work. There are also additional conditions when it comes to the tier of the zombie modifier that we want, that we're going to have to fulfill to increase the level. So If the item has 2 unsealed suffixes that are of the same tier, the zombie mod would get +1. So you can see that right now, the tier of the experimental mod is only 2. But if we were to modify our item by, for instance, increasing the first suffix from 3 to 4, it would change the level requirement, potentially giving us a chance to be a zombie belt. And you can see that this is now highlighted in green, meaning that we fulfilled this condition and the tier of the item goes to 3. The other condition is if the item has a sealed affix of tier 2 or higher. So this is something that we can add with a Glyph of Despair, but do keep in mind that if this is the case, you will no longer be able to use a Rune of Research to seal the experimental mod if you are able to obtain it. So this is something that you're going to have to plan ahead, but it might be something that you're going to have to use necessarily, because as you can tell, increasing the tier of the sealed affix changes the requirement. And in our case, if the sealed affix were to be with these exact mods in tier 3, then that means that we are going to get the minion damage. But in our case, it is not sealed, and even if I were to increase this tier 3 health into tier 4, we do not get the zombie. So like previously mentioned, we cannot mess around with the prefixes, but what we can do is check. If we increase to 5, will we be able to get the zombies? No, we are still not able to get the zombies. So let's see what we can do with potentially removing some of these modifiers. If we go to nothing on the 2, do we get it? We do not. With tier 1, we do not get it. If we go tier 2, it changes to cooldown. So none of these are something that we want, and that's our tier 4. Now, tier 3. For 2, it doesn't work. For 1, it doesn't work. And if we go with 0, it actually does work. So now we've got a decision. We can attempt to annul the health, and at that point, we can upgrade the mana into the zombie mod, and we can seal it. But there's downsides to it now, right? Because it can only be tier 2. This means that we will not be able to fulfill this condition. And we will not be able to fulfill this condition because by adding more affixes and sealing them, we're going to change what we want. So at this point, our only option, and unfortunately you're going to have to do this with a lot of belts, in my eyes, is a Rune of Removal. Hope that we fulfill the only condition that allows us to craft this belt into the experimental base, and that is removing the health. Nope, we removed the other modifiers. So this actually still means that we can get our belt, because the tier 1 is 4 and this one is 0. So we no longer have an exalted item for the +1. And if we check whether or not this works, it does not. If we add another affix, it does not. If we add another one, another one, another one, none of these modify the level requirement. We would have to do something else. But considering that we've lost 23 potential on the craft, oh, excuse me, I actually had this selected. Hold up. Nah, the outcome is still 52. Unfortunately, we cannot increase it, so it's just not going to work for us whatsoever. And with the little potential that it's got, in my eyes, it's pretty much a dead item. You can see that if we even start annulling, we cannot go below the 52, and we can't really increase it with the sort of modifiers that we have. And with the little forging potential, this item, unfortunately for me, is dead. But if you wanted to get any of the other experimental mods, you could have, you know. That's not going to be the case for me. Let's use another belt as an example, and then I'll get into boots. Hopefully you guys are going to have the right idea of how to do this. And then I won't really be showing an example for gloves because, again, you're going to be able to get the right idea. So let's begin. This is going to be a belt. So the same sort of requirement. What type of base is it? Praetorian belt. We're going to look for it over here. It's a tier 3, tier 3. So the base of the item is important because it determines the level requirement. So keep that in mind. Then we've got tier 6 and tier 4. Tier 6, tier 4, and no sealed affixes. This gives us a traversal skill. I'll try and speedrun this one. Let's just check everything real quick. We do fulfill some conditions, but not really the suffixes. We can't remove this to get that. We can't remove this to get this. I mean, this one is just a straight up Briccarino pepperoni. We can't really seal anything. Maybe if we seal this. Nope. If we seal that. Nope. I mean, this one is relentless, guys. I don't think we're going to be able to get it here. But let's say that, just for the sake of the example, that we really care about increased chance to find potions. So our item is 3-3-6-4. And then we've got 0 on the sealed affixes, which means that if I were to now take this item and click the Glyph of Insight, we can see that the item requires level 66. On our check, it requires level 66. And if I click this, it will turn into the increased chance to find potion. And that's how we get the experimental base. If this was something that we cared about, it would have been great. We don't. But on the bright side, because we didn't have to seal any affixes or do anything like that, do keep in mind that if this were to be something that we really care about, you can still absolutely use the Rune of Research. Just make sure to change the Glyph of Insight into one of these. And boom, just like that, we've preserved. And we could continue to craft the belt. Maybe let's partially speedrun it. I do care about the void resistance, so I still have to remove something. It's going to be a dead item because we removed the one modifier that we really cared about. This next example is going to be how to craft an experimental affix on a non-experimental pair of boots. So the rules are different than what they are on the belt, and you do have to keep that in mind. For gloves, the rules are also different. The way that you upgrade the tiers is the same, but the way that you obtain the experimental mod is going to be different. So for belt, it was the level requirement. For the boots, it's going to be the amount of forging potential that the item has. So a little bit more spicy. Definitely, you know, a lot of RNG there. But let's use these boots over here. They've got life that we really want to keep. And they are a pair of attuned arcane boots. Arcane boots, correct. So we are trying to we don't have to select the base, because the forging potential is what determines it, and the forging potential is determined by the sort of things that you put on the boots. So this one, you're going to have to decide a little bit further ahead. We only need to select the properties. We do not need to change this unless we change something on the item that then changes the forging potential. So we've got int at T5, or int at T3, so T3, T5. So we're going to be upgrading the int because it is a prefix. And then we've got T6 and nothing on this one. I want the minions teleported around you, but I haven't changed the forging potential. We can see that it's 36. If it were to be 27, we would get it. If it's 36, we don't get it. So that's kind of unfortunate. How do we go about modifying this? I mean, for boots, it's really kind of nasty because, yeah, you're going to be removing and adding forging potential depending on the items. We don't want to be messing around with the intelligence because this is the mod that we're going to be upgrading. You might want to remove the attunement. In my case, for my boots, I really want intelligence. I could really use movement speed. I could really use vitality potentially, and then I want health and health for the suffixes. So these are the ones that I'm going to be focusing on, especially if I don't just want to use these boots, but instead I want to use them to add LP onto a item. So it's gonna be a lot of gambling, guys. I mean, best of luck. For me, you know what? I'm feeling lucky today. So we're going to add hybrid health. This is going to remove 10 potential. So we're close to that 27. And we are now at the correct modifiers with this going from tier 0 to tier 1. But it doesn't really matter. It's just something that allows you to keep track of things. All we have to care about is the forging potential being at 26. Which unfortunately does not give me my modifier. So let's try and upgrade this. Boom, it preserved. We're getting a better item, but we're not quite getting the modifier that we want. We upgraded again, it didn't preserve. That means that our forging potential is at 22. Will this give us the correct modifier? It will not. I will continue. -3, that's going to be 19. And we do get the minions teleport. Again, changing these doesn't change anything. So if it's tier 3 or tier 4, all we care about is this one. And all we gotta do now is take this intelligence, use a Glyph of Insight. This will now change it to minions teleport. Make sure to always double check with the forging potential. Unfortunately, we had a 1 in 18. We hit the -13, but we now have boots with traversal that you might potentially utilize. Unfortunately, the only condition that we met for the upgraded tiers was the Exalted mod that we seriously didn't want to get rid of because it's HP. And through that, we could never have fulfilled the condition of affixes being on the same one, because you would have to get a suffix that has... excuse me, I'm pointing to the wrong thing. You would have to have a suffix that's 2 tier 6s. Otherwise, you can't really do anything because you can't even crit into it. And then we had nothing that we really could do with sealing other than removing the hybrid and maybe adding another suffix that would have been useful. But yeah, that's going to be our base of boots. Why not? For the sake of posterity, let's upgrade this. Hell yeah, hit him with the crit. It actually hits the experimental mod. So we got a little bit extra modifier there, but unfortunately also means that because we cannot upgrade this one with it being experimental, we are done with these boots forever, with maybe the exception of modifying the implicits or modifying the affixes. So in this case, I'm looking at the affixes. 32 to 39 minion damage. We've got 35. Looks pretty good to me. We've got 7 attunement, 7 out of 8. I don't really care about attunement anyway. We've got the health modifier that's pretty high up. And we've got the hybrid health that's actually pretty low. So because we don't really care about the other ones all that much, and health is something that we want the most of, I would probably use it. But another big factor is going to be the ward decay on the implicit. And actually the ward decay being higher would give me a greater number and has a greater chance to succeed because it is a below average roll. So we're going to be modifying the implicit. We got it. It actually got worse, but we still preserved. -6. It's now or never boots. And it also got worse. It's almost bottom row. Hey, sometimes it do be like that. If you guys enjoyed this sort of content, and if you want to see more examples, make sure to check out the Twitch stream. Maybe let me know in the comments below if you guys want another video of this type. Maybe you just like me clicking stuff. Maybe you like seeing endgame items crafted for the Wraith Lord build. And make sure to let me know, and I hope to see you guys in the next one.